And joining us now on the debate in San Francisco, California, Zaina Zaatari, Regional Director for the Middle East and North Africa at the Global Fund for Women. In Vancouver, British Columbia, Taysir Abulnasser, Dean of the Faculty of Applied Science at the University of British Columbia. In New York, New York, Isabel Coleman, Senior Fellow at the Council on Foreign Relations. And with us in studio, Haida Mohisi, Professor of Sociology at York University. And it's good to have all four of you on the program tonight. Haida, you were just in here last week. It's good to see you again. I want to start by playing a few seconds of something that went viral on YouTube just in the last couple of weeks. I'm not sure if all of you have seen this, but certainly it's had widespread play in Canada. This is a young woman making a plaintive cry during the course of the last couple of weeks of this historic time. Let's play that tape and then we'll come back and chat. Roll tape, please, Michael.
نزلهم 5 ولا 10 لو كل واحد فينا نزل 5 و10 ونزل بيهم لميدان التحرير او ميدان اللازوغلي او في اي حته عشوائيه حتى ويتكلم الناس ويقول لهم بقى كفايه بدل ما نولع في نفسنا تعالوا نتكلم ونسجل موقف ده هيفرق وهيفرق كتير قوي. اوعى تقول مفيش امل. طول ما انت بتقول مفيش امل هيبقى مفيش امل. طول ما انت بتنزل وبتسجل موقف هيبقى فيه امل. اوعى تخاف من الحكومه، خاف من ربنا. ربنا بيقول ان الله لا يغير ما بنفس حتى بقوم حتى يغيروا ما بانفسهم. ليه؟ مش علشان ان انت تبقى كويس وقاعد في حالك وماشي جنب الحيطه، الحيطه هتقع عليك وهتقع علينا كلنا. انزل وطالب بحقك وبحقي وبحق اهلك وبحقنا كلنا. انا نازله يوم 25 وهقول للفساد لا والنظام لا.
Taysir, I'm going to start with you. I think it's fair to say that many people have pointed to this video as being very influential in getting people into the streets and not giving up, and I guess it raises a question of what role women are playing in the events taking place in the Middle East. How influential do you think the female voice has been?
Oh, I'm listening to the tape now, and I've listened to it several times, and I honestly, my heart is beating again. It's an incredible piece of, this young lady, about 25 years old, has stated very eloquently what the whole thing is about. And if you listen to the whole 4 minutes, she's talking, it's not about jobs, it's not about anything specific, it's about my dignity as a human being. From the perspective of the program today, it is really interesting to see, there's another part in there where she truly is shaming the men. When you see how she's speaking, she's saying, I am a girl, I'm going down there, you are men, if you have any manhood in you, and you are trying to tell me that women should not be out there because they will be mistreated, they will be beaten up, and we should stay home. I'm going out there. If you're a real man, and if you claim you're protecting me, come on out and prove that you're a man. And that goes to the guts of the Egyptian man, if you want, deep down in his heart, to have a young woman like this literally shaming him and saying, if you call yourself a real man, come on down and do what I'm going to do. And I'm going anyway, whether you come or not. But if you want to be a real man, come on down. And there is no question that the role that this video has played has been huge, and the role that women have played in this whole exercise. Like you said, they're out there, big old women wearing the full hijab, young girls dressed in the most Western way you could imagine. The women are out there, and they're leading.
Zaina, let me ask you whether there's anything that you believe of what you've seen of the video on television that has surprised you about the role of women in this revolution.
No, I don't think anything has necessarily surprised me. I mean, women in Egypt and across the region have been leading struggles towards dignity, equality, freedom for many, many, many years. I mean, if we go back historically to the earlier parts of the last century where women joined other members of the population in national struggles for liberation, we've seen women take up to the streets back in 1919 with the Egyptian Revolution. So in a sense, this is not necessarily new. They are out there leading the struggle. We know of women's rights organizations in Egypt that have historically been working day in and day out to ensure access to rights for women across the population, from rural areas to the عشوائيات or unregulated communities in Egypt, to the major cities, to the universities, etc. Women's rights activists have been at the forefront, working diligently to ensure that women have access to their economic rights, political rights, health rights, working against gender-based violence, etc. So they have been at the forefront of these activism for many, many years.
Let me get
And
Isabel to
what
follow
we're
up on
seeing
that. Forgive me. Let me get Isabel to follow up on that if I can, which is, we know that women have played a huge role in the demonstrations, in the revolution. That video was one part of it, as we talked about. But how much are women's interests and women's rights themselves a part of what the protests in Tunisia and Egypt are about?
Not very much, to be honest. I mean, it's not specific to women's rights. These two countries, Tunisia and Egypt, actually have some of the most progressive laws for women in that part of the world. What you see the women out demonstrating for is for, human rights, for people's rights, for political rights, for political freedoms, for freedom of expression, freedom of assembly. In Egypt, it's about change. It's about, enough, kafaya. It's saying we've had enough of Mubarak. We don't want his son. It's about reform, but it's not specifically about women's rights in either country. Well,
let me follow up with Haida, because I think it's fair to say women in Egypt and Tunisia, relatively speaking, have had, very long, extensive legal rights. Tunisia, something like 30% of the judges are women. Egypt has had a long and influential feminist movement. Does that help explain what we are seeing in the streets these days?
First of all, I would distinguish between women's legal rights in Tunisia and in Egypt.
Okay.
In Tunisia, in post-independence since 1956, under Habib Bourguiba, actually the Sharia or many aspects of Sharia were not incorporated in the civil law and personal status law. So basically, for example, they abolished polygamy, they abolished the man's unilateral right to divorce, and Tunisia was the only two countries besides Turkey that had a secular constitution. So the difference starts from there. And maybe because of that, to be honest with you, at the beginning of the demonstrations and protests, it was a little bit surprising that you could not, at least in the news reports, see as many women as you expected. But there were explanations for this. Some people blamed the mainstream media, who were either not interested in getting women's pictures, or some in the internet. Actually, the debate was that maybe they even edit out women's presence.
Do you believe that?
I don't, but I'm saying that these were, some of the explanations. However, the presence of Tunisian women since the beginning was more, at least visible, than Egyptian women. And there is a reason might be that except for 60 years of these secular governments, regardless of the iron fist with which they ruled the society, had an impact on women. Besides, women in Tunisia have the highest rate of literacy and labor force participation. So that has also something to do with it. So women, for example, in Tunisia, immediately after getting rid of Ben Ali, they came to the streets. Union of women workers, the Women's League for Human Rights, and many other organizations on January 29th staged a very strong demonstration demanding equality, freedom, democracy,
let me follow up on
as well as separation of the state from religion.
Let me follow up with Taysir on that. Do you yet have a sense, Taysir, about how things might change for the women's movements in Tunisia and Egypt if, in fact, the entire governments fall, if the revolution, is completed to its logical extension?
I can't comment on Tunisia at all, so I will only comment on Egypt.
Sure.
Right from the beginning, female bloggers were on the internet, very active and very visible. There are documentaries about how men got involved because their mothers were involved, and when they saw how their mothers were treated, they joined into the struggles. And I see that even within my own family, where the women are going out after the sons go out to the demonstration. They go out, and then the father is running after his wife to make sure that she's not alone out there by herself. So the women are there. Shaifinkum was a very highly publicized group of women who are documenting all the election fraud, just pure women that were going out and documenting the election fraud out there. And that's a very big movement in Egypt. There was recently one of the TV anchors on the national television who quit her job because she publicly said, I cannot keep on reporting things that are not what is happening out there. So the women have played a very, very visible role. How much that will continue once you've carved that space for yourself within a very much area that could have been very violent. I mean, typically women are not going to go out into areas where you expect to have violence.
Let me get Isabel.
And demonstrations.
Let me get Isabel to comment on that same thing. Do you have any sense about how the women's movements in those countries are going to change if, in fact, the governments ultimately fall?
Well, I think the question is fall to what? What comes next? And if you see more democracy in Tunisia, which is the hope, of course, more democracy, I think, will mean more religious freedom and more, religious expression. And religion has been suppressed under the iron fist of Bourguiba and Ben Ali. It has been a very much of a hard-fisted society. Your participation at the mosque is monitored. Your outward, women's outward expression of wearing the veil has been restricted. It cannot be worn in public places, and these things will change. I think people will demand more religious freedom, more freedom of expression, and then then that might also begin to play into public dissatisfaction with some of the laws that have, as previous speakers have noted, have given women many legal rights in Tunisia based on secular law, not based on Sharia. So you may see calls from people in Tunisia for more introduction of Sharia. What that means for women, of course, there's a broad spectrum. You can have very narrow conservative interpretations of Sharia. I don't anticipate that in Tunisia. But you could also have more moderate progressive interpretations of Sharia that may in fact be compatible with the laws that they have or may not. I mean, I think that it will be a period of fluidity where more democracy will mean people expressing themselves and demanding both religious expression and change in a whole variety of ways.
Well, you're getting to something that I want to hear from Zaina on as well. And I don't have to tell you that there have been many people who are fearful that that a much more religiously fundamentalist government might replace whatever is in place in those two countries right now. And I wonder how concerned you are about that, and that whatever liberal/secular gains women have made in that region will be in trouble if something much more religiously fundamentalist follows.
Well, I think none of us can fully predict what will happen in the future, but I think there are a few things that we know for sure. We do know generally that more democracy is better for women overall. So that's something that is a given on some level. We do know that a lot of the women that are active in Tunisia and in Egypt have the consciousness of and the years of struggling for women's rights, and also have an awareness of their history, the history whereby after the demise of the colonials in the region, often rights of women were not consecrated into law that promoted equality. They also have the foresight of actually also witnessing what happened in Iran in 1979. So there's an awareness there that there are always dangers associated with this. But there's a level of consciousness that the activists carry with them that makes them more apt to immediately act and react and try to implement. Like Haida was saying, in Tunisia, there was a huge demonstration right off the bat between the two different women's rights organizations and the workers' union of women, to demand that the constitution become fully secular, because even though there have been advancements in terms of rights, there are actually certain rights that haven't been advanced, for example, inheritance rights and whatnot. And in Egypt, even though at the moment none of the agendas that have been outlined include necessarily or explicitly women's rights, I think people are transformed as individuals and as activists, and they're becoming more politicized, more conscious, more aware as they're going out to the streets. And that in of itself is a pretty significant step forward that can, to an extent, ensure that potentially we're not necessarily going to go back. I mean, the Egyptian women have been fighting and working against some of the agendas of the Muslim Brotherhood for quite some time. So this is not going to change necessarily in the near future, and they're not going to be short-sighted by this struggle. They've been vocal, and they're starting to talk about it more.
Haida, I of course want to follow up with you on this, because now remind me, you were in Iran in 1979 when the Ayatollahs took power.
Yes.
And some people are making the analogy 1979 Iran, 2011 Egypt. Do you share the concerns of what may happen to women in Egypt if it goes one way versus another?
It might, but at the same time, I personally don't believe that the experience of Iran will be repeated in Egypt. There are two major differences between the two revolutions or revolutionary situations right now. The first is the role of army in Egypt. The role of army in Iran was that they waited until the very last day that of the people uprising to declare neutrality. They were not liked by people, they were considered as enemies, so on and so forth, and the whole system collapsed with this declaration. In Egypt, the army so far has stood by, and it shows that they are going to play a decisive role in future. That's something that worries me a little bit about the future that Isabel was talking about. Secondly, they don't have a charismatic leader like Ayatollah Khomeini that could pull together the population. However, having said that, I don't think, we can say that there is absolutely no danger in future in terms of what the new government, it depends what composition the government has, but in terms of regressing women's rights or taking back some of the rights that women already have. We have had this experience, and when I want to go back to what I said at the beginning, there was my expectation about the Egyptian women was based on the fact that Egyptian women were the forerunners, actually, the pioneers of women's struggle in the Middle East. After all, in 1923, they formed their own feminist organizations. In 1923, many women's activists and organizations in Europe, for example, wouldn't use the term feminist. Nonetheless, Egyptian women in National Union of Women used that. But at the same time, I think that it is very important to learn from the experiences of Iran. In 1979, when women were the first group, we were the first group who came out against Ayatollah's pronouncement of mandatory hijab or veiling. And at the time, no political organization, I would use this term very advisedly, no political organization supported the huge demonstration that we staged only 3 weeks after the revolution, because women were very aware, compared with the political parties, that this is the beginning of suppressing other political freedoms and and personal liberties of people. Being vigilant and being
No, sorry, I just, somebody wanted to get in on that and I didn't see who it was. Who wanted to jump in there?
This is Taysir. I was just trying to jump in.
Go ahead, Taysir, go for it.
On this, because as the Egyptian in here, I'm really concerned about the comparisons being done with Iran all the time in the 1970s.
What troubles you about this?
If we back up just a little bit and let's compare with the 50s. Let's compare when you had a democratically elected person that was removed and you had a dictator placed by force in this group, forced the people down for many, many years. And then when they revolted, they went into a direction that people didn't like. I'm looking at Egypt now and I'm seeing a massive, massive uprising. I'm seeing Egyptians act in ways that are even amazing the Egyptians themselves. And they're saying, how the heck do you put all those people and they march so peacefully? Nothing is going wrong. Something incredible is happening there. If we're going to start telling them, you know what, we're really afraid that after this, you might get the wrong people to go into the leadership, you might not really be ready for democracy. So you know what, go back again under an authoritarian rule for so many more years until you're ready. That will be that will be the setup.
Well, Taysir, who's saying that? Wait a sec, who's saying that?
No, I'm not saying anybody on the panel is saying that, but the argument of we are afraid of what's going to come up afterwards I'm not so sure it's a valid argument, because the women that are out there in the demonstrations now are wearing the hijab, carrying the speaker in their mouth. They are leading the chants, and the men are chanting behind them.
Okay, I think the other guests want in on this as well.
But this is telling me that the women are in a powerful position there. They're not as fragile as the world is expecting them to be.
Let me hear from everybody on this. Zaina first, then Isabel, then Haida. Go ahead, Zaina.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Taysir. In fact, Omar Suleiman just said that this morning, that the people of Egypt are not yet ready for democracy. And colonial powers have said that before. I mean, the reality is this is a process. It's not a one-time thing that's going to happen or not happen. My only comparison with Iran is to say that women have learned of what happened in Iran, that the revolution was sort of hijacked in many ways. And they have a level of consciousness, and they're engaged with each other. I mean, you hear from women on the streets, they're saying, we haven't heard one word of someone harassing somebody else. Women and men are walking and working side by side, and there's not one comment. And this is huge. In Egypt, you always used to walk on the street and you get someone say something to a woman, and there's a whole public debate around sexual harassment. So I think there's a huge transformation that's happening, and people are taking up their civic responsibility, their citizenship, their unity to a whole other level that I think there are dangers. No one is saying there aren't, but I think the level of consciousness makes us very hopeful.
Isabel Coleman.
No, I was actually in Egypt when the demonstration started, and was speaking with many of the protesters and watching what was going on in the streets. And this is a people's movement, a youth movement. It's a very broad-based movement right now, and they are quite unified in what they want, which is a political change. They want constitutional changes. They want an opening of political space. They want Mubarak to step down. They don't want his son. Beyond that, you haven't heard a lot of specifics. I mean, what they're really focused on is the big political picture. And I think that the other panelists are right that the consciousness of people has been significantly raised by what's happened in Tunisia, by what's happened over the years in Iran, by what's happened in Iraq. I mean, there are lots of examples of what they want to do and what they don't want to do, and you hear them talking about that. But also the reality is that there are many different cultural currents in Egypt today. There's a very strong and growing Salafi movement that has, I think, had some very negative implications for women. And in a democracy, you're going to have all these multiple voices coming out and demanding for society to be organized in different ways. And you've seen this in Iraq. You've seen religious parties in Iraq demanding Sharia to be implemented in the country.
Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a second, Isabel. Let me
fighting back.
Haida wants in on this as well. What was your now when Taysir wasn't completely happy with the comparisons you were making with 1979?
I don't know actually why Taysir mentioned that, because I was not saying that we shouldn't trust Egyptian people to decide about their own future, or I was not saying anything about the possibility of Egyptians going the same way that Iran went in 1979. What I want to clarify is that it is it's imperative for women that even at this earlier stage, I'm not saying that right now in Tahrir Square, but there is a coalition, definitely, and there are many parties there. And Muslim Brotherhood is not the only one, and I'm not saying that probably it is the most dangerous party, as Mubarak and his cronies are saying, or sometimes Israel, for example, Prime Minister of Israel is saying that, oh, we should watch for Muslim Brotherhood and they are going to be another Iran. I don't believe that, and I've clarified that. My position is that Egypt will not possibly go that way.
Okay.
However, it is important for women to be vigilant about what might happen once this period of revolutionary moment is changing and there are people in power. That's why I say that the experience of Iran is very important. Khomeini in exile, when he was in France, was not the same Khomeini who came back to Iran and only 3 weeks after the revolution started, taking back, for example, the Family Protection
Understood.
Act.
Let me jump in here, only because I have to keep an eye on the clock, and we're running out of time, and there's a few things I still want to get to. Abbas Milani, the Iranian scholar, was in that chair a few nights ago. And he also said, if I had any advice to give to the Egyptians on what's going on today that we learned in 1979, it's pay attention to what comes next, because, it's all happening in the streets today, but keep an eye on what's coming forward. And I don't know, I'm sure our American guest didn't see this, but in Canada's national newspaper just a couple of days ago, well, I guess it was yesterday in the Globe and Mail, there was this letter to the editor which said, Muslim Brotherhood makes history, you say on your front page Monday. What we need to really make history is Muslim sisterhood takes power. Let's hope the former doesn't preclude the latter. And I do want to go back to Taysir and ask whether or not there is some concern, and we've seen it before, in countries where Islam is the dominant religion, some people think that automatically equals bad news for women. What do you say?
I mean, people like to say that, and it's with all due respect, a very simplistic analysis when you reduce it to Islam, because these countries have a whole lot of other issues other than the religion. Let's look at Turkey, for example, and let's see where it has went with all the predictions that are there. Should we be vigilant? I agree with the panelists. Of course, everybody should be very vigilant, because when you have a free environment, everyone is going to be trying to push their agendas, and we have to be very vigilant, and we have to be very supportive of the Egyptian men and women as they are trying to regain their dignity, in a sense. I think my concern wasn't directed at the panelists, but it was directed in general at the argument of, you know what, Egypt may not be yet ready, Arabs are not ready, Muslims are not ready. Let's make sure we give you a strong ruler who keeps everybody in check. We need to take that risk on that change, but we need to be vigilant and to be supportive of the people who are asking for the change. My fear is that we can wait too long and then send those Egyptians back with another Omar Suleiman taking over from Mubarak, and they're back where they started, and that will be a major, major danger for the future.
Okay, you mentioned Turkey, and Isabel, I guess I should follow up on that. Do you think Turkey is the model here that Egypt should be looking to?
Well, I'm not going to sit here and tell Egyptians what they should be doing, but what I can tell you is, after just having been in Egypt, the model that they keep pointing to, the direction that they want to go in, is Turkey. I mean, they look at Turkey as a model of a democracy, of a country that has incorporated Islam culturally, and is on a fast economic trajectory. I mean, they really do look at Turkey as a model that they aspire to. So in many respects, there are a lot of attractive things about the Turkish model for Egyptians.
Such as what?
Well, the combination of economic reforms that have been followed in that country.
I mean, in particular for women, as it relates to female rights, what is it about Turkey that is the model?
Well, I think that for many Egyptians, they look at Turkey as a country where women are able to be openly pious, openly religious, and yet they still are participating very actively as full citizens in Turkey. Now, there are many secular Turks who think that the AKP, the ruling party in Turkey, has been bad for women because so many more women are wearing the headscarf, and they see that as oppressive. But as I'm sure many of your panelists would agree and viewers understand, many women choose to wear the headscarf and they want that. I do know that there is a culture in Turkey where women are today very strongly encouraged to wear the headscarf, and some do find that.
Let me get Zain on this as well.
But just to move beyond that, though, you've seen the AKP really promote women. You have a third of the mayors of cities are women today. The AKP has really gone very aggressively after honor killings, for example, and using religious arguments of why honor killings must be very harshly punished and prosecuted. But I'm saying that there's an interesting mix of Islam, democracy, economic growth that people in Egypt look to favorably in Turkey.
Okay, Zaina, do you think Turkey is the model for women in Egypt or Tunisia today?
I'm not sure. I mean, there is one country that will or is the model. There are definitely different experiments, if we want to call them that, whether it's Turkey, whether it's Malaysia or Indonesia or Tunisia, other countries that have a majority of population that is Muslim. But I think whatever is going to come out is going to be particularly Egyptian, meaning that it will have its own history. I mean, Egypt has a large Christian population. Egypt has people with different levels of religiosity, different types of political organizing, and different histories. I mean, we can't forget that Turkey was initially also based on a pretty strong dictatorship that marginalized the whole Kurdish population, Armenian. I mean, I don't want to get into that. So there's so many, even in terms of women's rights provisions that aren't necessarily good. There are others that I would perceive to be have made changes, but that was a result of struggle from the feminist movement and from the women's rights movement across. I think, though, I mean, we have to get beyond this thing of Islam or not Islam. I mean, at the end of the day, if there is really effective participatory democracy, so what if different viewpoints are debated and discussed in terms of promoting particular laws? I mean, that's what we have seen here in the US recently. The right wing was trying to redefine the definition of rape. There's all sorts of issues. So whether, in that sense, we have to go beyond the religion and this scare that the West keeps pushing up as Islam is bad, Islam is bad. I mean, Islam is as complicated as Christianity.
Well, let me broaden it out here then.
A whole level of relationships to that.
Let me broaden it out here a bit, and at the risk of getting some of our Jewish viewers angry at me, let me try this with Haida. Do these uprisings, do you think, offer hope to women in Iran and maybe to women in other Arabic countries like Syria or Jordan or, dare I say, Israel?
Well, I would say that I think women in Iran, with all due respect, have been an inspiration to all women in the Middle East, because under the most rigid fundamentalist regime, they have fought, and for 30-something years, 31 years, they have refused actually to accept what the regime defines as the true womanhood. And when we talk about these learning from the lessons, look at the 2009 presidential election. Women, when I say that women should be vigilant, we have an example of Iranian women. In 2009 election, for example, women had the leadership role throughout the protest in the movement. How did they do that? Because they did it before the election. At the time that everyone was saying that we should focus on not having Ahmadinejad as the president, and we should be united on that, women, without actually supporting any of the candidates, they started a movement that they called demand-based coalition. And for that, they pushed for two demands. And they said that whoever among you, the candidates, would actually support these demands. One was joining Iran, the Iranian joining the CEDAW, Convention for the Elimination of All Discrimination Against Women, and reform in the Constitution in order to remove the discriminatory articles from the Constitution. They were doing this, and they provided the leadership for the whole movement. I think this is something that I would recommend, and I would urge my sisters in Egypt to actually follow in terms of right now organize something that is demand-based. They have several sets of demands, and whoever, they ask the political parties, including Muslim Brotherhood, what do you say about the rights of women?
Okay,
what do you say
I'm
about...
jumping in here because I got 30 seconds left, and I got to get one more question out here. I love your passion, but I got 30 seconds left, and I got to get. I want to give Taisir a chance to speak to this. If you had to predict where the next big opening for women might emerge in the region, what are the countries you're watching?
Well, I'm watching Egypt now. I'm glued to Egypt.
I hear you. How about beyond Egypt? What are you looking at also?
From a women perspective,
yes.
To be honest, I wouldn't be the one to comment on that. But my expectation from who's going to blow up next, in the sense of the demonstrations in general of the people there, would be the West Bank in Palestine. That's the one that is, in my opinion, is right to go. But my focus now, to be honest, we're all talking about what will happen after the change happens. My focus now is ensuring the change does happen, that we don't end up in a situation where we are protracting this forever, and then on the assumption that the media is going to go away and everybody's going to go away, and then everyone is going to come back to what they had before.
Forgive me, Taisir. Got to jump in here. I'm out of time. I got to save time for my next guest. Taisir Abul Nasser from the Faculty of Applied Sciences at UBC in Vancouver, Zaina Zaatari, Global Fund for Women in San Francisco, Isabel Coleman from the Council on Foreign Relations in NYC, and Haida Morisi, York University. Thank you so much, ladies, for being on the program today. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.